All right, as we await details of this memorandum of understanding, let's bring in Fox News political analyst Reince Priebus, former RNC chairman and former Trump chief of staff, who spent many an hour in that very West Wing that Peter Doocy is in right now. So the president yesterday said he's not thinking about the midterms in relation to the Iran conflict. This is how he put it here.
They thought they were going to outweight me. You know, we'll outweight him. He's got the midterms. I don't care about the midterms. Look what happened last night.
So he's previously said that he doesn't care about people's financial situation as it relates to Iran. Basically, he's not going to let these outside influences dictate what he wants to do on Iran, saying he's basically not going to be deterred from the overall goal. Right. Is that the right way to approach this?
Well, yeah, because I think that the Iranians think that somehow or another they can use the midterms, they can use events here happening in the United States as political pressure against the president, by the president saying, I don't care about the midterms. Republicans don't need to worry about that statement. The president is projecting to Iran that I am not going to outsource this decision to polling people, consultants, the press. I'm not making a decision as to American national security based on an election calendar. That's what he's saying.
All right, so you were there in the thick of it. How does he make a decision in a case like this?
Well, I mean, I think you know too. I mean, the president is probably one of the more complex.
Because Bill Clinton, by comparison, used to do this.
Yeah, no, well, the president does a little bit of that. I mean, part of it is this very clear message from the White House that says, from the president, we have a deal in principle, but I'm not going to make a decision for a couple days. So now he has a couple days to kind of feel this decision out, see how it plays. But that's a little bit too simple. I mean, the president is very unique in that, number one, he listens to a chorus. He listens to a lot of people. I think that's a positive. Some people, sometimes they try to view it as chaotic. It's not really. It doesn't matter whether it's his family, his staff, friends, people that he's known for a long time. He listens to a chorus. Number two, he puts opposites around him. He has some people around him that don't like the idea that we're in a projected war against Iran, and some people think time is now. So he puts opposites around him. Third thing, he's extremely accessible. He talks to a lot of people. He's the kind of guy that if you go to Bedminster, he'll talk to the general manager, say, how's everything going? It's going great. The members love it. The chef is great. People are so happy. We've got a long list of people waiting to get in. Oh, that's great. But then he's also the kind of guy that before he goes to the first tee, he talks to the guy clipping the hedges. And he says, hey, Peter, how's it going here at the club? Oh, Mr. President, we've got a couple problems. Well, what are they? Well, they're using the bad linens, or they don't like the men's. That is President Trump. I think it's fascinating. I think that's what makes him. I think it makes him a very good sort of weigher of equities when it comes to deciding things, especially like this.
So he takes a lot of different opinions, takes them all into consideration.
Absolutely.
And he makes a final decision. Obviously, there's some political risks that he would run if he renews strikes against Iran. Even though the midterms are still 6 months away, people tend to formulate an idea of how they want to vote, even at this point in the game. But when it comes to picking candidates, Donald Trump has got a phenomenal record this year. Let me put it up. This is his endorsement tracker. In the U.S. Senate, he endorsed 9 of them won. In the U.S. House, he endorsed 101 won. Governor, 8 so far, and 8 of them won. I mean, that's a 100% record.
Well, a couple of things. One, he defines MAGA. President Trump defines what the term MAGA means, and he gets to decide it, and he's the definer of it. So that's number one. Number two, you know, look, you're right. He is a riverboat gambler that is rolling 7s and 11s on the craps table on the first roll on a heater that's been going on here for about 10 years. And it's just an undeniable fact. And the people who try to make that not true or somehow try to go against the grain, they just lose.
You know, Iran keeps trying to push him up against a wall, whether it's the looming World Cup, whether it's the looming midterms or whatever. Gas prices are beginning to come down. Here's the latest AAA average. Current is $4.42 a gallon. A week ago, it was $4.56, so it's down 14 cents. A year ago, it was $3.16, so we're still above that. You know, drivers have absorbed it so far, but after a while it does begin to bite. But if those prices keep coming down, which I expect they will, if this memorandum of understanding agreement bears fruit, he may have just bought himself a lot of political time.
I mean, the general thinking is always, at least in my mind, I think it's pretty rational, is that gas and groceries and the prices of gas and groceries pretty much defines most people's view of the health of the economy. You can throw in housing prices in there as well. But so, yeah, I mean, generally you'd say that could be an issue. But if I had to write a book about where we've been politically in the past 5 elections, I think the title of the book would be Nothing Makes Sense, because you look at 2022, we were going to have a red wave. It didn't happen.
Yep.
24 was supposed to be close. Trump blew out Kamala Harris by a mile. 2020, they told us Biden's going to win in a landslide. Didn't happen. 2016, Hillary's going to win. Didn't happen. So I don't know what makes sense anymore. I see the generic ballot is about 50-50. Maybe the Republicans are 2 down. That's really close in a year when there's only going to be about 20 races in play, and each of those races only has about 2,000 votes in them that are in play.
Well, maybe the old paradigm of big losses for the party in power doesn't hold anymore.
I don't think it does.
We'll see. Ryan, it's always great to spend time with you.
All right, you bet.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Sandra?
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.